Residents in the Northern Territory's top end are being told to prepare for tropical cyclone Narelle as the system moves through the Gulf of Carpenteria. Narelle was downgraded to a Category 2 overnight after it battered its way through Queensland's Cape York Peninsula. Forecasters say the system could re-intensify and communities along the NT's eastern coast are being urged to prepare for damaging winds, heavy rain and possible flooding. The Bureau of Meteorology says some rivers have already risen as much as 10 metres in the space of just a few hours.
So we did see it making landfall as a Category 4 system around Cohen yesterday morning. It did bring very heavy rainfall, damaging to destructive winds, as well as very rapid river rises and storm surges right along the coast. So in terms of rainfall, since 9 a.m. on Friday, we've seen around 400 millimetres across the Weipa area. And at Weipa itself, we have seen between 200 to 300 millimetres, which is quite incredible over a very short period of time. And we have also seen very high rainfall totals about the northern tropical coast, including from about Daintree down towards Cairns and even further south. With that rainfall, we have seen very rapid river rises. So some of the rivers across far north parts of Cape York Peninsula rose about 10 metres in the space of just a few hours. So still very dangerous conditions across that part of the coastline. And we also have seen very large storm surges and very high tides, including around the Weipa area. But thankfully this morning, wind and rain is now starting to ease across Queensland as the focus shifts towards the Northern Territory.
Well, the clean-up is getting underway in far north Queensland. Our weather presenter and resident meteorologist Nate Byrne is on the ground for us in the town of Weipa on the west coast of the Cape York Peninsula. Hi there, Nate. We've had our eyes on the Northern Territory for a couple of weeks now. Yeah. That flooding in the Katherine area is really concerning. Now we've got the whole sort of east coast on watch.
Yeah, so the system is now in the Gulf of Carpenteria and it's intensifying. Some relative good news is that it hasn't picked up more power as quickly as we maybe first thought, and that's good because that ultimately means it won't get as strong as it could get by the time it reaches the territory. But it has also slowed down a little bit, so we're now expecting a coastal crossing likely in the early hours of tomorrow morning. The problem with that is the longer it stays over the warm, shallow waters of the Gulf of Carpenteria, the more chance there is of it intensifying further. At the moment, we're expecting to see wind gusts around about 180 kilometres an hour as it makes landfall. We've had communities evacuated in parts of the east of the top end, so good news there for many. Now, we'll keep a close eye on the situation through the day today because we're going to see that really start to deteriorate as we get into this afternoon, but then that'll last through into tomorrow certainly, and then we'll probably see the system weakening relatively quickly back to a tropical low. But you've got to remember, and I know you know, Mel, because you're a tropical woman, the strength of a cyclone only tells you about the wind speeds. So once it becomes a tropical low again, that means the winds will have died down, but it's still carrying with it all this heavy rain, and that's really the problem. You know, the last round of major flooding at Katherine was happening with only about 50 millimetres in the gauges. The Bureau is saying we're likely to see somewhere between 70 and 130 over the course of tomorrow, perhaps even more. So Katherine, Daly River, all those communities that have been soaked for weeks now and have been dealing with flooding are about to get yet another burst from Nurell, and then there is a chance that we'll see the system popping back out into the Joseph Bonaparte Gulf to the north of WA, and then maybe re-intensifying again. So we could be talking about ex-tropical cyclone Nurell and then tropical cyclone Nurell once more later next week.
All right, a lot for you to keep across. Nate Byrne, thank you very much. We'll let you and your very brave cameraman get out of the wet weather while you can. Well, let's head to the Northern Territory now, where communities are preparing for Nurell, which is expected to make landfall soon. Reporter James Elton has the details from Katherine, which is, as Nate said, of course, still recovering from floods a little earlier this month.
Nurell is expected to impact the east coast of the top end as a severe tropical cyclone after re-intensifying in the Gulf. The immediate concern is for communities like those on Groote Island, places like Borroloola and Numbulwar, although Numbulwar residents have been evacuated over the last couple of days on RAF planes and taken to safety in Darwin. For those remaining people in East Arnhem Land communities, they've been told to hunker down, to make their final preparations, especially if they're on the coast, to secure their properties and things like boats. Further inland, places like Nooka and Bullman, those communities are being told to watch the situation closely and to start preparing their kits as the cyclone gets closer to them. And then as the system tracks further inland into the top end, as it reaches closer to places like Katherine, a major regional centre for the Northern Territory, it is expected to downgrade at that point to a tropical low, but it's still expected to bring potentially damaging wind and very, very heavy rain to an extremely saturated catchment. Keep in mind that Katherine has just been through a serious major flooding disaster just 2 weeks ago, where scores of homes and businesses were inundated and the river reached its highest level in almost 30 years. Now, on that heavily sodden ground, people are bracing for a potential second flood. The Bureau of Meteorology is saying that the Katherine River could start to rise quite rapidly through the course of Sunday afternoon and evening, and into Monday they say it could once again cross the threshold that makes a major flood event. That's 17.5 metres. It remains to be seen whether it will reach the lofty heights that it did 2 weeks ago, where it was more than 19 metres. And that's where it really starts to inundate large parts of the town and the CBD. So people in Katherine will be keeping a close eye on the Bureau of Meteorology's predictions as they get better intelligence about exactly how much rain is going to fall in the Katherine catchment. Preparations are ongoing in Katherine. There's been a little bit more notice this time around just because of the nature of this system and its highly predictable track. So a sandbagging effort is in full swing, and the community is preparing itself to have sufficient food supplies, fuel supplies, and a sophisticated field hospital has been transported to Katherine, which will be set up. That's courtesy of the National Trauma Response Group, a crack team of medical professionals who are well placed to be able to deliver disaster and emergency relief to the people of Katherine if this does indeed turn into another serious flood disaster.